have the pieces of row 1 down here together, you want to make sure that your corner pieces point outward. This one will have the teal inside and the red corner pieces. I'm going to take the right piece and turn it onto the center piece. Get the top edges even and the right edges even. Get them lined up under your needle for your scant 1/4 inch seam. Start sewing slowly. And I put my finger on those threads so that they won't get pulled down in the machine and make a bird's nest. Come on down. When you get to the center, make sure the seam from that other piece is going in the right direction. When you get done, cut that loose. Put it back in place. Make sure both corner pieces are still pointing outward. Fold this one in and sew it together the same way. I have my rows sewn together now. This is row 1, row 2, and row 3. Make sure you do not get these two turned wrong. We want to make sure the red corner pieces point away from the block, and this print right here is against the center solid color. Now, as I press my seams, I try to think ahead and figure out what will work best for the quilt. On the red ones, I have pressed the seam toward the red corner pieces on these two seams right here. They're going outwards to those. On the green, I've pressed the seam toward the green, and again on this one toward the one with the red corner pieces. That way, these seams will lock together, one going in each direction when I sew them together, and I'll get that pretty nice T shape where the seams meet. I'm going to turn this one down onto the center one and sew it on. Then I will turn this one onto the center one, sew it on, and when I iron the seams next time, I'll be done. I have my top row turned onto my center row. I want to match up the seams in the two places where they should meet between the 3 blocks of each row. To get ready to sew these together, I'm going to get the top edges and the right edges even on the first edge of the blocks. Put them under your presser foot where it will be that scant 1/4 inch. We always use that scant 1/4 inch. Hold your threads out to the side. I just put some pressure on them so they can't get jerked down into the machine. Sew just a little bit. Get into it just good. Leave your needle down. Now go down to this first seam and put them next to each other and snug them. Take your finger and just snug them together, and then put a little tension on it as it goes through the machine, holding those seams together, and that way you know you're going to wind up, when you get to that point, those seams will match. So sew to that seam. Make sure your right edges stay even. And when I get very close to this seam, I double check it again, and then take a seam ripper or a stiletto and stick it down in right at the edge of your fabrics there, right where you want them to match. Slowly sew through the seam. Do not hit your stiletto with your needle. Stop with your needle down, and we're through that seam. We know that one's good. So we're going to go to the next seam and line it up. We'll sew to it, then we will line the far corners up and sew to them, and that way all of our edges will come out even. I have the first block completed. All of the sections are put together. I have it on the board here with the wrong side showing. When you press these pieces in the direction that they should go and you have a well-ordered quilt block, it will look nice and neat back here. Everything will be flat. It makes the quilting of the quilt so much nicer when it's like this. So try to get all of your blocks pressed correctly, and we need 6 blocks like this with the green center, the teal center, and 6 of them with that cranberry center. So get busy with your blocks, and I'll be back with you when we're ready to put the blocks together. I completed all of the individual blocks. We have 3 across and 4 down. Now it's time to take these blocks and sew them together into rows, and then we'll sew the rows together to complete the quilt center. Now when you're sewing the blocks together, you want to match the first edge right here Match these points on the diamonds, the seams in between the blocks. Just go from seam to seam, matching as you go across, and it will look really good. The center of the quilt is completed. We have all of these pieces sewn together and the seams pressed. The next part of our quilt is this first little skinny dark border. I like to frame the center of my quilt with a small dark border and set it off, and then have a lighter border after that. The next step to do that is to measure across your quilt center. We want to know how far it is from one side to the other one so we can cut our top and bottom borders. Now I have taken some of this dark green and taken 1.5 inch strips, and I cut 7 of them, and I believe that'll be enough. And I cut the selvages off and connected them end to end. So I have one long strip. I'm going to measure the quilt center, 54.5 inches. I'm going to write that down on my piece of paper. And then measure again. You want to measure twice and cut once. And that way if you make a mistake, you make it on paper and not on your material. 54.5. So I will cut 2 strips of my inner border, 54.5 inches, and attach them to the top and bottom. And I'll show you how to even out the ends in just a moment. The top and the bottom borders are on the quilt now. We're ready to measure for the side borders. To do that, we're going to measure from the very top of this green border we put on to the very bottom. I have already measured that, and it was 74.5 inches. So I will cut 2 strips, 74.5 inches, and I will attach them to the sides of the quilt, and we will have our first inner border completed. I have my first inner border on. Now it's time to measure from side to side again and get the measurement for that next top and bottom border. I'm going to do this procedure over and over until I get all the borders on the quilt top. Our quilt top is done. We have all of the borders on the quilt top, and it's ready to be layered and quilted in the method of our choice. Try to think up some interesting patterns when you quilt your quilt top. You have all these nice solid squares and diamonds that you can put motifs in. Then you have the connecting white areas that would look good with a vine or a similar background quilting. So, and also this border on the outside, you have a large white border. It is great for doing some curly feathers, things like that. And you don't have to be real good to do those. You just need a little bit of practice and a nice curvy line to get started on. Get you some blue washout pens and draw all over it. If you don't like it, spray it with water and it disappears, and you can draw on it again. So get ready to design your quilting motifs and get this quilt finished. Until I see you again, happy quilting.